Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today in these exceptional times. Let's talk about the economy. That is the number one concern, according to all polls of Americans today. And let's talk about that with this brilliant economist. He's part of the family here. He's a professor at the New School, does so many things. And he has really helped to guide me and help me to understand the economy in ways that quite frankly have been surprising. That have been surprising because who wants to take econ in college? Everybody. But it's that one professor who helps you to say, you know what, I'll take that class. I can actually get through this. I can learn this. And he is that person. And so we're very, very happy to have him once again, Dr. Max Fraud Wolf. I've got a lot of questions for you, and a lot of people have a lot of questions. And so I'm talking to everyone here. Please, please, please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Everybody get on over there. I know we're coming on earlier today than usual, but we're going to switch back to this time. We're going to switch back to this time because many of you have been asking for it. And I want you to go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That is where I can be found. That is the only place where I can accept friends. I'm on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social. Just look up Santita Jackson. You can find me there. And I'm at Santita J on X. Yes, I am still there. So let's get to it. I want to know just broadly, Dr. Wolf, the state of the economy. What is it? And I ask you that question within this frame. In the 2024 election, everyone was talking about the price of eggs, because they've become exorbitantly high. It's shocking, how much eggs cost. But everyone is looking at their grocery bill, and they were saying that last year, and they're mortified. Like, I cannot afford groceries. It's on that micro level. That is a worry. Most Americans who work in the city can't afford to rent in the city, wherever they are. Buying a home, that's beyond the reach of most Americans, and that is at the heart of the American dream. So the state of the economy, just generally speaking, before we even get to the tumult, because I've got whiplash every 5 minutes. It seems like we have tariffs. We don't have tariffs, but most of us don't even know what tariffs are. So let's just get to the state of the economy, and then I can ask you some other questions.
Sure. So thanks for having me. I think I'd start by saying one thing, which will be a theme, which is that basically having an unknown future, having a lot of anxiety and very little clarity about what comes next is an enemy of prosperity. So you show me a place in Flux where people can't figure out what's going to happen later today or tomorrow or next week or next month, and I'll show you a place where the economy suffers because people need to have some sense that they know where they are and where they're going to feel confident to make decisions. In the United States, about 70%, so let's say basically two of every $3 here is actually consumer spending. So how the public feels is no big deal, you know, to in the public mind, but it's actually a big deal in the economy. So you may think how you feel doesn't matter as an individual, but how you feel collectively does sort of guide this ship, right? Economically, as well as obviously to some extent politically, but to more extent, economically, because maybe 40% of America sits out our elections or more, but 40% of America doesn't sit out our economy. They're all there. You're all buying the $50 eggs that you were promised to be $3, and maybe you're upset about it now, and maybe you're not, right? But either way, you're in there because you're buying stuff, and you can't really live without selling your labor, right? Your ability to work, and you can't really live without buying things. So again, a lot of people sit out of our politics for one reason or another. They don't sit out of our economics for a host of reasons, right? Turns out, the wealth of your parents will determine your sort of prenatal life. So the economy is already contouring your life before you're out of the womb, and it'll also determine where you're buried. So from before you're born to after you're gone and everywhere in between, the economy is a big player in your life. You may understand it more or less, but it's always there. So everyone's involved, and it gives it a certain democratic validity that we don't always get from our politics, I think. So that's one thing I'd say. And look, uncertainty is the enemy of prosperity as a general rule. So where is our economy? Our economy is declining pretty rapidly. Now it's not sure how deep it goes or how long it lasts, and there are ups and downs. That is part of our economic system. So that's true with every Democrat and every Republican and every policy you like and every policy you don't. There are ups and downs. That is kind of the system, and we should acknowledge that in a sort of fair and bipartisan manner. That being said, we are grappling with one of our fundamental sort of missing information issues in America, right? So let's start here. The federal government of the United States and how it expresses itself, often through states and localities, is about a quarter of the economy of the United States. So we like to say it doesn't matter. We like to say we want it gone. We like to say all kinds of stuff that should be pretty fundamentally embarrassing by the time you're 10 or 11 years old. But it's encouraged here. Okay. So slashing back the federal government to make people wealthier is like cutting off your leg to go on a diet. Like, yes, you will weigh less, right?
Oh,
But you're probably going to have trouble getting around, and it could turn out to be a mediocre decision, which is why it's not recommended, even before the age of Ozempic or whatever the miracle cure du jour is now. Okay. So chopping off your right leg is a mediocre weight loss strategy. It is the one that our economy is presently attempting, right? And that's because people feel underserved by the government, a good point often. They feel afflicted by the government, a good point often. And most Americans only see half of what the government does in their life, if that, and they see that they have to pay into a tax system, right? And that money is that they need is missing from their salary. And very rightfully and very reasonably, that makes them angry. There tends to be zero connection between how much you're taxed and how heavily you feel taxed. In
mm,
other words, people who pay more taxes sometimes don't mind taxes. People who pay less taxes sometimes don't mind either. Sometimes they both do, blah, blah, blah. But everyone would sort of like to pay less taxes because Americans have been taught a strange accounting mathematics, which is you get the same amount from the government no matter how much the government gets. So let's give them less and get the same amount, which is a reasonable idea, except for that it kind of doesn't work, right? And so what happens is you have these massive deficits where the government is spending much more than they're getting, and then people get nervous about that because that affects the economy too. And you end up in a situation where you either have to learn a little bit about the economy, and to your point, it's not always everyone's favorite subject, and I respect that. You have to learn a little bit about it, or at least you should refrain from probably opining on it too strongly. Right. So, alongside our unfortunate army of virologists who spent a lot of time learning about viruses while on the toilet, you visit YouTube, who are now out there advising the public, we have economists similarly trained. Right. And it turns out that sometimes those people come up with something and they have critiques that should be heard, especially if a lot of people believe them. But sometimes the inspiration that a toilet bowl and AM radio gives you isn't pure and unadulterated science. So there are times in which it can go astray, especially if it's led astray. So I think we have an issue there. But Americans believe a fundamentally odd thing, which has set up this moment, which is when it comes to buying toilet paper, you should have a lot of choices and you should buy the best toilet paper you can possibly afford. And there's, the religion of 2-ply versus 1-ply versus 3-ply. We kind of get it that the toilet paper we use has an effect on our life. I do too. Okay. I'm not out there making my own toilet paper, so I get it. But we somehow believe that the quality of our civilization, our government, unlike toilet paper, is unimaginably unimportant, and we should simply pay the least amount possible. Right. So unlike the important things like toilet paper and toothpaste, we should really just pay for the cheapest, crappiest government possible in order to save a couple bucks. And so that's an ideology that's powerful in the United States. That's white, it's black, it's old, it's young, it's urban, it's rural, it's pervasive. It's kind of part of the American view. But now that the government is 25% of the economy, and now that we live in a global economy, which by the way, we will not leave. We can stay in it and fail, the track we're on, or we can stay in it and succeed. That's up to us, right? But we're not leaving it because it's not leavable because we just spent 60 years integrating into the global economy, right? So we still measure economies as though there's an American economy and a Canadian economy. There isn't. There's an economy where some authority flies under the Canadian flag and an economy where some authority flies under the American flag. They're one economy. So we have one economy now, largely, and about a quarter of it is the federal government of the United States. For us in the United States, and the significant portion of the economy in other countries is the government of the United States, right? So an economy is nothing more than a mathematically calculated system of interdependence between people.
mm.
Okay, that's all it is. So when you have the fantasy that you don't want to be interdependent anymore, it's exciting. Read about Robin Caruso, express it. If you want to be less involved in the global economy, that's your right and privilege. Do it. but you're not going to withdraw from it, and we're not going to withdraw from it. Even just like the kid in the corner screaming, I'm not part of second grade, he's absolutely part of second grade. He's just not in the sharing circle right now.
Hmm.
And he's running off the number of cupcakes he's going to get and the number of invites he's probably going to get to birthday parties as fast as he can. We're the kid in the corner now.
We're the kid in the corner now. What does that mean?
Well, we're unusual because we walked there and started screaming at everyone else. Otherwise, things were fine, right? So we weren't banished. We weren't sent there. It wasn't unfair. We sent ourselves there, right? And we're a little bit more the teacher in the corner, which is even weirder, which is why the world's a bit scared, because we're protesting a system we built to enrich ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So most people know that around the world to some extent. Many Americans do, some don't. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but we are sort of haphazardly tearing down the global order that made America a wealthy empire. And this is surprising and it's dangerous. We're in the early innings of it, but it's starting to have all the predictable side effects, right? Which is if you are suddenly changing the rules of the game, sometimes more than once in a day, for reasons that are unclear, people notice first, you're erratic. Second, you're scary. Third, that you're full of crap because what you told me at 9 a.m. is not true anymore at 7 p.m., especially if you do that 5 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So imagine being in a relationship with someone like that. It would be trying. You'd have to really like them and they'd be running that off. Yeah. So that's the relationship America is in with the world. But we have this funny thing where we have that ideology that the government doesn't matter. And we have this ideology that we're naturally atop the global order. So if we change it, we'll still be atop it. I don't know what to tell you other than that is an incredible idea. Make an action movie, write a book, but just understand that it's fiction.
So, what is, I'm trying to find out what the end point is. What do you believe that the Trump administration are trying to do?
I don't think they know, and I know that I don't know. I think they have a whole bunch of things that they're against, many of which America's angry about too and against, and they're lashing out because the problem is changing things is slow, hard work. Tearing things down is fast and it feels good.
Yeah.
Punching a hole in the wall when you're mad is effective to some extent, right? But it is not a fantastic home renovation strategy.
Well, help me to understand what they're doing because you've got Elon Musk at front, but there are others who are helping
Sure.
to guide these cuts. First of all, if you could explain to me what Doge is and why Doge is going after people as opposed to the Pentagon, which has failed 7 consecutive audits. I realize America's business is war, but
I mean,
seven
America has many
consecutive.
businesses,
Yeah.
but like, look, part of what's happening is people are angry about taxes that are hard for them to afford to pay. I get it.
Mhm.
There are some good points there. You can't refute all these, and I wouldn't try. They're angry that their dream of what they think you get as an American isn't coming true for them, right?
Right.
And so that could be the sort of politics of male grievance, which is a big part of MAGA. It could be the politics of white privilege, which is kind of a big part of the story. It could be the politics of I'm a citizen, you're not, anti-immigrant stuff. It could be the politics that I'm against corruption, which I think most Americans share, and I feel afflicted by corrupt powers that are unaccountable. Like there's lots of different strains. I wouldn't reduce it, right? But basically, what you have is unplanned anger where people don't understand the importance of the government they're attacking, and they just want to set it back to an imaginary time in which they did better. Right?
And
Now, what when I did better means a very different thing to a billionaire than to a guy who used to work for a living family wage at a factory. They're just
mhm.
different people. They have a different view. So you knit them together with a politics of grievance and anger, right? Now, sitting behind the politics and grievance and anger, while the public is excited by seeing you break things, you have your hands on the lever of the US government. And here's the reason I know the government doesn't matter story is a scam. And so do some of your listeners, I'm sure, do too. And that is because the government of the United States spends $19 billion a day. Nothing scammy about that, right? So it's 25% of approximately the largest economy in the world, the US, and they spend $19 billion a day. And they flog the general public with ignorance and spectacle. So, oh, we can't afford to pay for our USAID because it costs $40 billion, right? Like, if you understand the US government budget of spending $6,000 billion a year, actually over $6,000 billion a year, you know that's a scam. That's no different than the girl who tells you she can't go out with you because she has to wash her hair tonight and she doesn't have the money for shampoo. But what you spend on shampoo is much more than what the US government pays on the aid programs that keep people alive and keep America's stature in the world. Right. And
Mhm.
so there's behind the scenes, there's also some unconventional uses of government power. And, playing follow the money is always illustrative here. So the irony of the moment is all these people want you to believe the government doesn't matter and it's bad news and smaller is better, but they've spent all their money and all their time and all their power to have their hands on the lever and pay themselves money. Right? So that's, I think, the tension of what's happening now. But in terms of where the United States is going, we're going the same way you'd go on a trip, a really important trip, driven by a drunk driver driving through the back rearview mirror. That's where we're going. And people like to make up theories and conspiracies about this and that. And there's always some of that. Okay. But this is more scary than that. This is more incompetence and privilege. Right. Like, this is what happens when you get a surgeon because his dad was a good surgeon.
Well, I mean, when I
And
see
that dude is still cutting into you with that knife, and it's pretty sharp. And hopefully he picked something up around the dinner table, but otherwise, you're about to shed your earthly container.
well, Doge is doing what? I mean, who are they? And I mean, and who
So
is Elon?
Doge is a sort of made up construct. It's
Okay.
the Department of Government Efficiency, right? So just think of the basic premise. Let's get non-experts who don't know what they're doing, set up an entire new agency of the US government, which may or may not be constitutional, and then let them do a whole bunch of stuff that a lot of people wanted to do anyway, but is probably impossible to do if you're an elected official. And so the strategy is, let's have some quasi legal, quasi governmental agency do all the shit we wanted to do that we couldn't get away with for a long time. And then we're not on the hook. All we have to do is stand back and let them go crazy and then grumble about them. And then when they become enormously unpopular, hopefully we survive it.
Well, see, I'm trying to figure out how all of this is supposed to work, Dr. Wolf. We're talking with Dr. Maxwell, economist from
I
the
don't
New.
think it is supposed to work.
Oh, okay. What is supposed to happen then?
I think if it is sane, planned out, and rational, which I still think is a little bit not clear, but if it is sane, and then you have a couple of different agendas working their own agenda with little or no regard for the impact on the United States. Because all the cutting we're doing, hurting all these lives, will be swept away, like tears into the ocean by the extension of the tax cuts that's coming. So the idea that you're trying to save money to put the ship back on the right course, which I would support actually, is not going to be borne out unless we don't extend the tax cuts. And every indication is that we extend the tax cuts, overwhelming all of our savings.
But
Right?
but see, we're cutting all of these workers, but the workforce has been shrinking for decades. I mean, when President Trump, when our parents were born, 4.5% of the workforce were government workers. It was down to 1.5%. It'll be much lower than that. What is the end game? Is it automation?
Yeah, there'll be some automation for sure. I mean, that's more, I think, a private sector story than a public sector story. I
well,
mean, look,
but then that my question then is: are they with all? Because the services have to be performed. Mail has to be delivered.
no, it
Okay.
doesn't. No, it
Oh,
doesn't.
so what has to
So I
happen?
mean, yeah. So let's separate this out. For people to enjoy what's left, with the flagging remnants of their middle class society, they want and need these services, right? But the plan here is not to do that. The plan is to go back to pre-depression, certainly pre-Great Society, right? The plan is to get rid of what I would call like modern social theory and the Great Society. The plan is to go back to a few with endless wealth and many with endless struggle, and to remove the accommodations made to popular movements over the last 80 years. To take America back to where it was 80 years ago. Of course, you can't jump in the 80-year-old river now, but the idea being that we don't want this, we don't need or want the middle class. Automation may be a part of the story, but you know, the part of the story of automation is more that the importance of the mass of the general public is hanging by a thread in participatory democracy, right? And so give the people something to hate every 4 years, press a couple buttons, think they're empowered, and then have the majority of people sink into poverty. It's kind of already happened. The last act in some way of the mass prosperity of America was the debt balloon, where you sort of let people still live like they're middle class by borrowing a bunch of money and then giving them more government services than their tax revenue pays for. And this is a group of people who've decided to get rid of that. So yeah, we didn't always have mail. We didn't always have a fire department. You had private fire departments, and if
Yeah.
you didn't have the right one, or they'd both show up, and that your building would burn down while they're arguing with each other over who gets to put it out. The
Well, see, but
government is not
if
a birthright. You have to fight
okay,
for it and build it, like anything else, like a middle class. These things don't naturally occur. So part of this is the difficult reckoning that America's not naturally on top.
okay. See,
America
because
doesn't naturally have a middle class. America doesn't naturally have participatory
right,
democracy. America, you have what you fight for in this world. And what you fall asleep on, you don't have. And I think a lot of the anger that supports Trump in some people, and it makes people opposed to him and others, is the American public just woke up naked in a van. And they're groggy and they're trying to figure out who to blame. But they got no wallet and no phone. And so there's a pretty good chance that the first person who tells them who to hate wins the game.
well, you and I are not in disagreement on that. I mean, because I
Okay.
know we don't have to have any of these things, but we assume that we do because they're there, right? We assume.
Eh,
Well, no, we've made a lot of assumptions, and they're incorrect assumptions because we don't really understand. I don't think the moorings of the republic in the first place. I mean, we're talking about democracy, and that is not what we have. We have elements of a democracy. We have a republic first. Boom.
yeah.
Constitutional republic first. Boom. And that's a big, big deal. So in the meantime, Doge is going on. People are being fired, or they're having to leave. They're taking these buyouts. What does that do to their
What
pension?
they're doing is demoralizing the people who work for the federal government,
Absolutely.
demonizing them, right? So what the public needs to understand is when you come into an agency, denounce it, ridicule it, dismiss it, diminish it, and then terrorize everyone in there about losing their job, you crush the effectivity of the agency even when you've only fired 10 or 15 or 20% of people, which is a lot, okay? But even if the cuts aren't that major, right? What you're saying is a guy who needs a hobby can give a lot of money to a politician and come in and rewrite the rules of America. And he doesn't need any expertise, he doesn't need any experience, and he doesn't need to suffer any accountability. So, in other words, if you can get a letter from the president saying you can't dismiss or critique this guy, okay, fine. What are his accountability? Who is he accountable to?
And who is Elon Musk accountable to?
Not clear because this is a government. One of the great ironies of all time will be that we hired the world's most overpaid man. That's what this guy is, right? So you want someone who should be replaced with a robot. How about a guy who paid himself $54 billion last year? It's a lot of savings. But in any case, right? So in order to reduce the size of the federal government, we have created an entire new, possibly illegal agency to audit the federal government. Just the federal government is very audited. It's a highly audited institution, and thousands of professionals perform audits all the time. The Congressional Budget Office does some auditing. The General Accountability Office. This is a highly audited institution, and it's highly transparent by American standards. Now, should it be more transparent? Probably. Is there lying and misleading going on? Like, come on, two people are talking. There's always going to be a couple of things they share that aren't accurate, and a couple of things they don't share that they should. So when millions of people are talking to people and their jobs are on the line, you can expect all kinds of misadventures. There's misadventure, but it's highly audited. We have specialized auditors, and they're carefully selected and accountable. So, for instance, they don't audit their business competitors. They don't audit their own contracts, right? In this case, that's okay. In the case of Doge, that appears to be okay, right? So this is this is an unaccountable, unelected body that was brought in on a wave of anger about unaccountable and unelectable decisions. Unelected decisions is kind of ironic, right? So to some extent, the American public is now sitting angry, having overpaid for a bad movie, and being so mad they slash the seats, and no one's mentioning to them that it's a drive-in.
Are these cuts necessary?
Some probably are. But the problem is if you start like if I come into a room and tell everyone they have to leave the house, some of those people probably shouldn't have been in the house. If I just told everyone to leave, it's a little bit like running someone over, and the person turns out to be a bad guy. You're like, oh, I'm a hero. right? If you plow your car into a sidewalk and you get a couple of bad guys, it's, yeah, this is, this
But
is not, okay. Look, I understand too that this is not a joke. Like hundreds and hundreds of people are dying every day now because of these
Mhm.
decisions already, right?
Mhm.
And untold tens of millions are having a really rough scar carved into their life experience for
Yeah.
themselves, for people they know. Other thing I think about, which people don't tell you, that groups that are overrepresented here are being overly hurt, right? So the federal government employment base is very highly veterans compared to other groups of employees in America. So almost a third of general public employees have some service in their background, right? So this is going to hit hard on veterans. People who need veterans, the VA, which is a lot of people who've served the country, they're being hit hard by massive job cuts. You can tell people whatever you want, but it's not true. Student loans and student loan borrowers who are trying to figure out what happened and where their loan's going to live and what agency is going to have it and how they go about it, they're being hit really hard. People expecting disabilities, people on Medicaid, and you start adding this up, you're talking 50, 60% of the American public is going to be hit. And it will be disproportionate. So lower income people, people of color, veterans might get hit hard first. But again, go back to the first thing I said, even though it's annoying, it all will tie up in the end. It's a system of interdependence. If I hurt your neighbor, I hurt you. If your neighbor can't afford to make his mortgage payment and his house gets foreclosed, your house loses value too. If you have people who are expecting checks from working at or being assisted by the federal government to come to your restaurant, to come to your dry cleaner, to buy new tires at your auto shop, you're hurt, right? If you're the manager of the local Dollar General and people can't afford to come in there and buy as much stuff, you're hurt, right? Even though you may not be following and you may have no particular political opinion for or against anyone involved, right? But Doge is mysterious. To me, Doge right now is an exercise in accountability, and it's a little bit of a flex, which is kind of the theory of the Trump administration, and it may bear out well. But the theory is we don't really need to ask people for permission. Changes are desired. I'm going to change things up. I'm going to go on TV 43 times a day and say something dramatic, and that's what the public wants. They want a show of somebody making big moves and changes because they're frustrated because Congress has been gridlocked and change has been promised and not delivered. And that's true from Democrats and Republicans.
well, I'm trying to find out what is going on here because I'm watching
Yeah.
so
And I'm
many people.
frustrating you on
No,
purpose.
no, 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 no. You're not frustrating me. The thing is, people are looking for answers. I've got William Aponte. I brought him up, and he said, "For me, this is life or death because I make $1,614 from my disability checks, and my copay for two of my 8 medications. One is 980, and the other is 214. So he has to make a decision between paying his rent or buying his meds." I mean, and countless people are dealing with that. Now, mind you, that's disability. We're not talking about people who did not expect to go into 2025 letting go of their jobs and having let go of their comfortable houses and their comfortable lifestyles and their health insurance
Sure.
and their disability insurance. I mean, a lot of people have had their lives ripped apart.
And
Yeah.
more is coming. And more is coming because those Medicaid cuts, they're going to jack up this pain swath. And the point is, do those people do something other than complain as they sink into the abyss? That's the political challenge, I guess. But like, this is an aggressive decision. This is an aggressive decision that we can make. We don't need to take care of people anymore. That we're in it alone. Those of us with the most means will be okay. I'm not sure that's true either, by the way. And that we can reset the society. So those who pay little taxes can pay less, right? Those who need and go without can go without more. Or frankly, we can get rid of them in some way or another. This is the plan. I mean, that is not debatable. And the reason I'm not giving you a good answer for Doge is because there isn't one. because this isn't accountable. This isn't Congress. This isn't our process traditionally. It isn't clear what authority these people have.
See, I'm trying to figure things out. I think that's why
Yeah.
I'm at a loss. I mean, I sent questions to you, and
I
I'm
can tell you the answers to those questions in terms of what will this do to the economy? What is this doing to the economy? How will this change the distribution of income? How will this increase desperation? How will this translate into more drug abuse, more alcoholism, more domestic violence? We know that's coming. We're baking a social collapse cake. So I can
well,
tell you what's on the menu, but I can't tell you how legitimate it is or where its authorities rise from. And I'll just say one thing. I'm doing this intentionally, sort of, to be
uh-huh.
annoying, and that's because nobody else is bringing this up. We're just pretending it's legit because of who does it. If we do that, we're going right off the cliff.
But that's why I brought you here, because I want you to get our hackles up. Because
Okay.
because I think a lot of people did not vote, voted one way or another, or many people did not think that this was going to impact them. Even those who voted for Kamala Harris did not believe, they had no conception that they would lose their jobs, and not just their jobs. I mean, we
They're
we're
losing their America.
they're losing their America. They're losing their lives. They're losing health insurance, Max. They're going to lose their houses.
For
Their,
sure.
their children are in school. I mean, in secondary, primary, and
Their
college.
kids are going to lose some of their education because how much money goes to those schools and what they're taught in there, right? I mean, lots of things are going to change. Now, look, some of those things will help people too, let's be fair, but most of them
Okay.
don't look like they're going to help people, right? So some will help, but you know, and I think to me, here's the issue. To the extent that Americans have largely thought the following, which I think is true, I'm not blaming anyone, but I think Americans have largely had the idea that politicians are liars. That's true if they're Democrats or Republicans, that they tell you some semblance of what they think you might want to hear every few years. And then they do whatever the heck they want, mostly. And so the way that went in the United States is, hey, I'm not going to pay much attention to this because it's distressing or depressing or angering or some combination of these things. And I'll be okay anyway. At the end of the day, this doesn't really matter and things don't really change. And that assumption was probably to some extent true, not really, but to some extent true for long enough that people got comfortable, right? And look, people as a rule, I tell you, this is an economist, this is not a left right thing. People like to think something's unimportant if they don't understand it, particularly if they're afraid it is important. They like to comfort themselves with thinking it's unimportant, right? I'll give you a good example of it, which you see every day. Americans, for a host of reasons, don't study or know anything about modern Europe, in my experience. And so
Yeah.
they mostly tell you Europe doesn't matter because it makes you feel better. Hey, I don't know anything about this. Oh, like good news doesn't matter, right? As a general rule, Americans aren't that interested in American history either, and they'll often console themselves with some notion of it doesn't matter that much. Or they'll say it matters and move on, right? And so you can sort of play some of these blind spots against people. There's some of that happening too. But the assumption was, hey, they're going to do more or less the same thing. Why should I get involved? I don't want to get my hopes up and get heartbroken. I don't want to get lied to, or I want to be on the winning side. There's a lot of bandwagon fans out there. I want to be on the winning side and feel like I won something, like I do when my team wins, or whatever, my favorite movie at the Oscars or my favorite recording artist at the Grammy, whatever it is, right? It comes like, oh, is my person going to win, right? And that has been weaponized successfully against the American public.
Well, why does Europe matter?
I mean, look, everyone has to make their own decisions.
Hmm.
It's largely the largest economy in the world, right? So if you put together the entire European Union, it's the largest economy in the world. It's the largest sort of Western democratic group out there to sort of be an ally to the US and its foreign policy with gesticulations historically. And it's an enormous market for the United States. And
Okay.
so a player on the global scale like China, like the United States, like the European Union is so large that it cannot be replaced.
Okay.
And
So
so that
if
if it convulses, it sends shockwaves into all 8 billion of us running around on this little marble.
well, if I have to look at, if you have to give the economy's weight, and this might not be fair, but I just for scale and for us to understand, United States, Europe, China.
I mean, look, Japan is huge, South Korea is huge, South America is huge. There are people. I'm not trying to make any decisions about who's more important in the world,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm just
Well,
saying the
yeah,
large
because that's
size of
not the
economy.
question. Because that's not the
Okay.
question. It's helping us to understand economically.
Yeah, so
But
Western Europe, the United States, and China probably account for more than half of all economic activity in the world.
okay.
Actually, they definitely account for more than half of all economic activity in the world,
Has the
right?
ascendance of China surprised Europe and the United States?
I think it surprises the United States more than Europe because Europe
Oh,
already saw this movie before with the United States.
okay.
And the Europeans don't go into this thinking that I am astride the globe and that is the natural order of things,
Okay.
right? They think we were astride the globe and we spent so much time killing each other and fighting with each other that we lost the crown. And the Americans have been particularly excited about telling them that they lost the crown lately, right? And China sort of has been rising, right? Pretty decisively, in the last 10, 15 years, but it's been slowly rising, and particularly Asia. So I shouldn't say just China, right? Northeast Asia. So, South Korea, Japan, China, and other states have been rising, right? Brazil has gained an enormous amount of importance.
Mhm.
Nigeria has gained importance. South Africa has gained importance. India has really exploded onto the global scene, right? So, yeah, it's a more complex global order, right? So that's certainly true, right? But I think Americans have also baselined an abnormality. So one of the worst things you can do when you build a model of how things work, even if it's informal in your head, is say, well, this is the normal state of things. What happens when we're out of whack? How do we get back to normal? You have to do a lot of work to figure out what normal is. Okay, so most Americans think normal is a big middle class with a fairly non-corrupt government with the United States on top, right? But that really only occurred from the 1930s to the 1980s. So it's kind of already been in sort of structural decline for 40 years. And, human history is even longer than the last couple hundred years or last 75 years. And so, yeah, that's not normal per se. That's not destiny. That isn't like you drop something and gravity pulls it to the ground. Like that's not how that works, right? It's not even a long standing norm. Right.
Hmm.
So if you want and need something in the world, it's pretty good to figure out where you stand and what you need. Right. And I don't think America's done that calculation. The average American hasn't. But the people who run this country have made those calculations super aggressively and they're moving more or less without restraint.
And who are they? I mean,
Oh,
I've never seen this many publicly wealthy people on the front row at an inauguration in my life. They typically do not. They're not performative. In fact, you don't see them at the inauguration. They might be at the White House, tucked away in the Oval Office, waiting for the president to come through after the parade is over. They do not show up. But I looked on the front row, and you have Elon Musk and his son. You have Jeff Bezos and his fiance. You have Mark Zuckerberg and his wife. I mean, and we can just keep on going on and on and on. I'm like, what
yeah.
is going on here? What
Well,
is?
big tech, like any large industry, and that's one of the largest, most dynamic industries in the country, they do really care who makes the rules and what those rules are, right? And so that's probably normal. Having them in the front row is unusual. Also, having a debate about how a desperate teenage mother from Ecuador who walked here to sell oranges on the highway is the secret economic problem for America's massive middle class people, while you celebrate on stage the technologies that cost them their job is surreal. Most Americans who've lost jobs have lost jobs to technology. I know they think it's foreigners because it's easier to blame, right? So they either
Mhm.
engage in a sort of mass delusion that foreigners somehow called their employer and said, "Hey Bob, how you doing? I sure would like a job." And he's like, "Oh shucks, I love Tony over here, but you seem like a nice guy." And then a job moves to another country. In case you care, as an economist, I can tell you that's not how international personnel reassignment goes as a general rule. Yeah, so if
Well,
there's a
so then,
single incidence of that, I'll be surprised. But so they either imagine it's poor foreigners who don't look like them, just
mm,
sort of human brain thing, right? Like, I would like to think I can figure out who it is. I would like to think I can beat them easily in a struggle. And I would like to think they don't look like me so I can identify them. I understand that. It's not true, but it's comforting, right? But so it's a delusion. But more jobs have been lost to technology, to automation, and technological progress than trade. People don't understand that, but that's true. So celebrating technologists as you're elected on a wave of rage from middle class men is the height of irony. It's almost as ironic as making up a big, expensive new government agency that isn't accountable, that starts sort of pulling out the Jenga pieces of the federal government because people are worried that the government's not reliable and it's not accountable. So you make it way less reliable and way less accountable,
And
right? Because the general public doesn't understand. They live on these services. It's 25% of the economy. I didn't choose the allegory of chopping your leg off randomly. You will lose weight if you chop your leg off, but it's not worth it, right? And by the way, if you take, again, no offense to your listeners who may be in the midst of performing this procedure or have had it involuntarily done for some reason pursuant to an accident. But like the point is, here's what I've written on this. I'll say it again. Chaos is a capricious, massive tax. When you're figuring out if you're ahead or behind, if you cannot see into the future, you will pay dearly for it, and you will not know how much or when. That's why chaos is the enemy of prosperity. It might be exciting, makes for good TV, right? But it's the enemy of prosperity. One, two, if I do a bunch of things in the economy that knocks your income down by 30%, gives you a 5% tax cut, you just traded a $50 bill to me for three $1 bills to you. At some point, you're going to realize there's $47 missing in this trade, and you are not ahead.
so, I mean, so when you hear Martin O'Malley, the former Social Security administrator, former governor of Maryland, say, hey, and he said it just a couple of weeks ago, 30 to 90 days, the system will collapse or it will be collapsed. So the checks are going to stop. I suggest that you save. Save what? Most people are living from payday to Monday. You know that.
Sure. And also, look, telling people your basic, what you rely on for food, medicine, and shelter will be gone soon. I mean, sure, it's not a bad idea to save some money in general anyway, especially if the tap's going to be cut off, but like it's not a solution for most people, right? Look, I do think that there are places in the government where the diminution, the sort of crushing morale and random, seemingly somewhat random job cuts. Like, I don't think they cut the nuclear security forces reactors probably on purpose. I'm assuming that was an accident. The alternative is horrifying. I don't think we firing teams of cyber defense people, some of whom I know, who are incredibly essential to the functioning of government. I assume some of this is just, you got a bunch of people on a sort of ideological high, feeling unaccountable and super potent, doing all kinds of things and figuring they'll sort it out later. But the problem is that they're not promoting an electric car that can't live up to some of the claims. They're promoting a different vision of the country without the federal government, which they also rely on. So this isn't just hurting people who are low income. It's just people who are low income have the least ability to be resilient in the loss of income because they don't have much income. It's not a measure of their personality at all, right? But if you make $5 a day and something knocks $2 a day out of your hand, you're suddenly starving to death. If you make $5,000 a day and something knocks $20 out of your hand, you're hurt too, right? But like last
Mhm.
thing, I'm going to keep saying this because it annoys people. An economy is a system of interdependence. There is no story where your neighbor's house burns down and you're unaffected, and in most cases, not better off, right? So I do think we kind of got here because we've decided the government doesn't matter because we don't understand it. We've decided it's small, right? Or it should be smaller. And there may be some cases where that makes sense, but it's been taken way too far. So we're ignorant of the government. We're ignorant of what it does. There is a certain amount of entitlement that the government will bail me out while I hate on it and don't support it and criticize it and try not to pay it any money, which turns out to be a mediocre relationship strategy. Shocking. But, there's a lot, but I think Americans think they're in it alone. And my guess is that got worse during COVID. So many people left
Mhm.
alone, suffering, separated from friends and loved ones and family members, maybe even in their final hours. That you really got this idea at some point that you were in this alone. Really
Yeah.
felt that way to most people because they kind of were, right? And I think our already alienated from each other kind of worldview with a sort of rugged individualism idea in the world, it's just me out there with the buffaloes or whatever. It got somehow a lot more intense, right? I'll give you one other example. The best studies in the world that I've seen about what causes mass addiction is isolation.
Mm,
People are least likely to be seriously addicted to drugs and alcohol if they're in a sort of community of people who care
absolutely.
about them, who they care about. People will recover better if they can have a community around them and they're not just judged and rejected. So that, again, not my area of specialty, can't claim expertise, but that's what the studies tend to exist. And those numbers went crazy higher during COVID, and like they've come down a bit, which is good, but not all the way back down, which is worrying. And I think people also look for a single individual to solve their problems when they're alone. Because if you face the world as a single individual, you're more likely to believe an individual will magically solve your problems. And I can tell you one useful thing amid all this hot air I've been sharing, which is individuals can't solve social problems.
No, we cannot. I mean, but the reason that I'm so glad that you're with us today, because there's so much that we're seeing that is confusing and that's unsettling. People are frightened, and we have been in isolation for 3, 4, 5 years now, and increasingly isolated. Dare I say, by class. I mean,
Sure.
by economic class in the United States. Just one quick question. Maybe it's not so quick, but if because it's all over the news. Tariffs.
Hmm.
If you could explain what they
Sure.
are, why we should be concerned about them, because a lot of
Yeah.
people talking about them and they're saying, well, when we didn't have the IRS, we had tariffs and we were able to build wealth.
That's not
Tariff,
correct, but
well, no, I'm telling
yeah.
you what's out here in social
Okay.
media.
Sure.
So, what
Sure.
is a tariff, and should we be concerned about that? Because we see Canada, our closest ally. You go to Detroit, you can run to Canada. You go to Seattle, you run to Canada. You don't even think about it. Now, there are hostilities on the border.
Sure. Well, I mean, the esteem of the United States has taken a catastrophic hit, probably one of the worst in American history. And it's gone incredibly fast. And we are guiding the catastrophic and rapid decline of American prestige, right? And it's going fast. We're accomplishing years of decline in weeks, sometimes days. Right now, might some of this work out? Sure, anything's possible, right? Maybe you'll roll the 461 times in a row on dice. It could happen, right? Um, Betting on it may or may not be a super good idea, but it is possible. So a tariff is just a term for a tax placed when goods move across borders, mostly goods, sometimes services, move across a border. So it's just a special tax that you say, hey, if you want to sell something here and you're not from here, you pay this tax, right? And every time it's been tried in the last 100 or 150 years, it's generated a little money quick. It seems powerful. Citizens love it because it seems like money someone else pays. Then they realize that they're the person who pays it. Then they realize that the other group does what are called counter tariffs or retaliatory tariffs. So they say, oh, yeah, you're going to put a special tax on my stuff in your country. Guess what they figure out? Oh, I'm going to put a special tax on your stuff, right? Because, hey, if your politician is getting cheap points by blaming foreigners and trying to make it harder for us to sell in our country, let's do the same. And that's happened. Now it happens in hours. So sometimes it used to take longer. Now it happens fast. And so we have our three largest trading partners as America. America's three biggest trading partners are Canada, China, and Mexico for a whole host of reasons. Okay. We have entered trade disputes with all three of them simultaneously. Right? So I think there was some weird imagination here that this would work out like an action movie. I think we're seeing the action movie theory of international policy, which is of course not a theory at all, which is let's fight everyone at the same time. By the way, traditionally not an incredibly good idea for a host of reasons that you don't need me to tell you about, right? So we decided to fight all of our closest allies right away with savage attacks, ad hominem attacks, and crazy proposals, which were immediately returned back to us, right? Then we claimed moral outrage that they would tariff us, having just tariffed them, which made it very clear one thing, which is the state of American dispopularity around the world, disdain for America is spiking fast, so fast that not getting along with the United States and our president is now a political strategy around the world. It helps you at home, right? you cannot believe me because you don't like my story, and you can find another one of those on the toilet researchers giving you the advice you want to hear on YouTube. But this is not a matter of debate. This isn't a right wing thing or a left wing thing or a Democrat thing or a Republican thing. And this is going to shock you to your core. This is my expertise. If you insult people and threaten their economic welfare, sometimes they don't like you. It's weird, I know, but it happens in this crazy world. And so we're starting to see a situation where wild attacks and tariffing from our central government are ill received around the world. We have also reneged on our basic international agreements, right? We're rumored to be contemplating leaving NATO. We've stopped being a highly functional ally, although we built NATO to sell weapons. We're no longer somehow interested in that. We have hyper alienated and reneged on our commitments to UNICEF and the United Nations, which is killing people on the ground, right? Letting them die. We have also done that with the World Health Organization, and we're rumored to be exiting other international agreements. Leave it out there to think that that tiny number of people who don't live in the United States, approximately 95.3% of the world's population, they might not like that. Okay. And because an economy is a system of interdependence, if you alienate 95% of the world's population, it will show up another way. Okay. And the other way is when you're selling Coca Cola and Levi's and Disney, you're selling the vision of America, not the vision of America of a bloated racist bully, but another vision that's more popular. Right. And so if you chip that away, it'll have X factor cost to American business that's huge, hugely enormous, and to Americans traveling abroad or dealing with the world, even if they're doing that from home. Even if they're doing that at home in their foreign made clothes, subject to tariff, sitting on a steel sofa full of tariffed steel made in Mexico, where we're having a tariff battle shipped across the border to the United States, right? You're going to have these problems because before you leave your door in the morning, unemployed or employed, you've had your foreign clothes changed. You've possibly used foreign electricity to generate your water, some of which is also foreign, to put on your new foreign made clothes, and then get in your foreign made car, possibly full of foreign gas, and drive towards your job, which may or may not be dependent on foreign income, because about 40% of the earnings of American companies are not in the United States. So again, this is sort of like pretending that you're invisible. Might be fun for a while, but at some point you're going to notice these weird pattern of crazy people who think they can see you. And no matter how much internet research you do at home on the toilet when you get home, this is going to haunt you. And so that's the problem with tariffs. When you tariff people, they tariff you back. In trade, we call it beggar thy neighbor. And the reason it's cause of concern with economists, which it, to me as well, is that it tends to be a strategy that can lead to wars. Trade
Mm.
wars often come before actual wars, right?
Well, China's made some very aggressive
Yeah,
comments about what we've done. They've
yeah,
said that, not only are we ready for a trade war, we're ready for any kind of war. America,
yeah.
bring it.
Yeah, and
I,
I think the Europeans are being told that the United States, or they're worried from their politicians, that the United States is at risk of joining Russia and taking and attacking them. So whether it's true or not, well, I don't know. I don't tend to believe it's particularly true, but there's a fear, and so they're going to now emergency rearm themselves too. So ironically, what we have been very good at with our tariffs is uniting people who generally don't get along in their distaste for us and getting lots of people to plan and spend money on being able to fight wars. The reason we don't love that historically is because if people spend all their time and money taxing people and reducing their benefits to prepare for war, the probability that things spill out into an actual conflict is higher. Right? So
this,
that's why you don't do this stuff. This stuff is not good for business. So I mean, again, I'm not saying that is enough and screw the people or anything like that. But what part I don't really understand, and there's lots I don't understand and whatever. But part of the part I don't understand is the people who look like they're going to be blocking these punches with their face, right? The average person, the person who needs these services, and even the big businesses around the world have seemed surprisingly quiet.
mm,
Now I know it's overwhelming, it's a lot fast, and people are reeling, and people are mourning. I think for what they thought they could count on. So I think the Great Recession and then COVID and now this is telling Americans that you're alone in this and you have no idea what tomorrow brings. And that is overwhelming and difficult. And that people go into a kind of resigned mourning period, right? But at some point they come out of it, and they'll have an opinion, and hopefully we'll hear it, and hopefully we won't lose our sort of basic democracy, and we'll fight back against erosions of our basic decency. And that can be from any, again, that can be any political persuasion. This is not a Democrat or Republican thing. I honestly don't think it is. I don't think it's left and right stuff. There's that in here, but that's not what this is. This is something else.
Dr. Max Wolf, this is the state of our world today. If you're helping us to
Exciting.
understand this, well, no, I mean, well, no, to really know, to
Yeah.
understand that, at the apex of, the pyramid of needs is interdependence, not independence, it's interdependence, where we're
Yeah.
independent and we can depend upon one another. And I think America, because of isolationism, this rugged individualism, we've lost our way. And I hope that we do find it because, boy, oh boy, our lives depend upon it. People are losing their jobs and they are frightened. And when you have this many people frightened and compliant, it's a toxic brew.
Yeah.
I last word before
Yeah, I
we.
mean, look, to me, what's important is people can look to each other for solution. And if they don't, they'll fail. So that's also the effectivity part that's pleasant. But you also feel connected to people. My plea for people would be, don't blame the usual suspects, because that's where violence comes from in these times.
Mhm.
And try to figure out a way to make things better. Leave the sort of perfecting the imaginary past to reactionaries.
Mm.
Leave the politics of grievance and who did what to whom in the past, leave that to the reactionaries. It will never take you to a good place. And I guess just for me, for my everyday life, take care of yourself and other people. It's hard out there. It's hard to keep your head up. It's hard to read the news. It's hard to think about what this means and who's going to suffer. It is hard, right? And it is debilitating. And it makes you want to shrink away and run away or have a drink or do whatever or blame someone and get angry. But to the extent you can stay focused on what's happening and support the people who are trying to get through it, you will actually feel better and do better. And I know it's easier said than done, and I'm not always winning on that front myself. So I get it. The backsliding happens, at least in the few inches between my ears that I have some semblance of control over. So I know it's tricky, but it's super important. Just staying healthy and staying caring about yourself and caring about the person, people around you. It's an act of revolutionary defiance in a weird way. Quiet resilience, and it's real hard. And so everyone who pulls that off on any given day, even if it's not every day, you're a little bit of an everyday hero. And so I do sort of think it's amazing when a little bit of light comes through the dark.
I guess you keep hope alive, huh?
Yeah, others have said it better.
Well, no, that's you said it right this morning. And my father does say also that you turn to each other and not on each other in these exceptional times. And we can get through this, but we've got to grow through this, not just go through this. Everybody will think about it. The brilliant, thoughtful, and always just so profoundly humane Dr. Max Wolf, my dear
Kind
friend.
words, kind words. I think I get a lot of that from you, and I owe a thanks to the family as well. But I appreciate you for still being kind enough and generous enough to have me on, and I hope your audience doesn't turn on you with great anger
No, no,
immediately.
no, 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 no,
Hopefully,
no.
you can end the show and turn the comments off for a few days and let it simmer down.
No, 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 no. We needed to hear this today because this is the chief issue for Americans today.
Yeah,
And I'm very careful about who I bring to this audience because they're my family. And you're my family, and I trust you. And that's why you're here. And so
thank you.
thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Couldn't ask for a higher compliment. So thank you, and I hope to come back when you guys will have me again. Maybe under even a happier moment, but we'll see.
No, we're gonna get through this.
Yeah.
You have an open invitation here to talk about anything. You know that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sending you so
Uh,
much love. And to
thank
my
you.
god baby Thea. Hey, same
I
birthday,
will. She says
born
hi
the
too.
same birthday,
Same
same.
day.
Can you
Yeah.
believe
Special day. It's a good.
special
It's a
day?
good set of numbers too. So lucky numbers, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Take care.
Sending
Thanks
you
for
love.
having me.
God
Bye bye.
bless. Everybody, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. See you in a little bit. We're going to be talking about education on the Santita Jackson Show. Back in a minute.